Hello out there, you wonderful people. This is Andre, the Game Idea Guy. Thank you once again for lending me your time and your ear listening into another Gamer's Thoughts discussion. And this is going to be talking about the future of Nintendo, or basically the successor to the Switch. Now, many people have had many different takes, and I have listened to some of those different takes, and I have heard some interesting things. Hopefully, I remember all of the stuff that was talked about that I'm going to be kind of throwing my hat in the pot on. Um, Actually, if you haven't listened to it, there's a Stormcast on Sandstorm McDowell's channel, and I think that would be optimal for you to hear that and listen in because Terminator Juice was in there, and they were talking about different ideas and thoughts for the follow up to the Switch, which is a podcast I should have been on, but I had to work that night and I had to sleep before going to work. Otherwise, I would have been dead at work, and I couldn't have that happen. So I'm hoping that I remember most of the things that they talked about in that podcast. This has been a little while since I listened to it. But even if I don't cover everything that they talked about in there, um, I still say it's a good listen. So go over to the channel. I will leave the link in the description on YouTube. And if you're on Anchor or anywhere else, I hope that the link will work. I'll also leave it there as well so that you can find it. Now to get to the point, you know what? Maybe I should just focus on what I would think would be good for the Switch's successor, um, which may cross over into the stuff that they talked about anyway. So, because that'll be a little bit more natural to me, and I don't want to try to focus on remembering everything. And if there's something I didn't talk about, and somebody wants to hear me give my perspective after they listen to that podcast, I'll go back over it. Just let me know what you were talking about and give me a point in the podcast at which you were talking about, so I can go back and listen, and then I'll cover all of that. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about what I think would be great for a follow up to the Nintendo Switch as a successor. Again, I don't have the technical expertise to know how possible or plausible any of this would be. Um, I'm just going to be shooting from the top of my head. There were already some thoughts in my mind anyway, and this was a subject that I did want to cover because we know it's not going to be exactly a long time before that device comes. And I've just spent about 3 minutes rambling, so let's get to it. So, firstly, for a successor for the Nintendo Switch, I want them to continue with the cartridge format. I know that everybody's got this thing and they're up in arms about cartridges and all this. Fuck all that. I want them to continue with the cartridge format. Mostly because, one, it makes it easy for backwards compatibility. Two, cartridges can read basically depending on where they are placed on the board and how they connect to the board and the sockets and everything. They can basically bleed right directly into memory, which slows down load times and so many other things. And on top of that, you don't have to install a game in order to be able to play it if it's on a cartridge. Now, I do know that that means that cartridge sizes getting bigger means that they're going to be more expensive. Gaming was going to get more expensive anyway, especially with everybody trying to push 4K. So, why is it unacceptable for an expense to come at the form of the storage media, but we can go ahead and say, well, hey, if your system's pushing all these polygons and all these effects and stuff, that's fine. I don't see why one is bad versus the other. Um, if you can accept that certain platforms are going to be pushing 4K and trying to get 60 seconds at 4K, and they want to push all these special effects, they want to push ray tracing and HDR and all this other stuff, then you should be able to accept that, hey, Nintendo's going to be like, okay, well, we're going to stick with this storage medium. We're going to increase the size of the cartridges, and hopefully that means that we can get more games running directly off of the storage medium and storage media and allow people to not have to wait to play their games. They can just pull it out their case, pop it in the system, and you're good to go. Secondly, now this is just something for me. I want Nintendo to have their successor to the Switch have at least, and I mean at least 12 gigabytes of RAM. Now I'm figuring their OS, especially if they keep the current Switch OS and maybe just update it a little bit, they may be able to get away with just only using a gigabyte of storage for it. And again, if they have that much RAM, it'll help a whole heck of a lot. I'd also like to see them bring back eDRAM. I don't think the Switch has it. Either eDRAM or SRAM. I'd rather they bring that back because that helps with a lot of processing and it also makes things more unique to a physical console. I don't think that PCs really benefit from having that type of memory, mostly because it almost serves no purpose. But if you have that type of memory on a console, it can allow for you to have additional functions that you wouldn't think would be readily available without it. So if it's there and it doesn't cost a lot, from what I remember hearing, it doesn't cost a lot for them to implement this, especially if they were to say quadruple what they had on like the Wii U, which I believe was 32 megabytes. Put 128 megabytes of eDRAM in there along with 12 gigabytes of storage, and I think that everything's going to run pretty smoothly. I mean, you could talk to Shadow Fox and confirm it with him, but I think that that would work out pretty well. Also, I would want the Switch successor to have an SSD. I think it would be a M.2. Is it M.2? M.2 SSD, because I think those are the small ones. Again, I may be incorrect on this. But if it has an M.2 SSD in there, that means that they can make their storage be bigger. They can make their storage bigger, and it wouldn't cost them as much for internal storage, especially if they're going to be utilizing the same type of storage that they've been using. I think that an M.2 SSD would be cheaper in the long run, especially if they're buying them in bulk. That might be cheaper for them in the long run, and then they could stick to using what they have been using for the storage format as their onboard memory or as their RAM. Because I mean, I could be wrong. Again, talk to Shadow Fox. I don't know. I think that they are of similar styles. No, I think I'm. You know what? No, I'm thinking I'm pretty wrong on that. Let's scratch that part. Maybe have two different versions of it. Have one that has the 64 gigabytes of onboard storage that comes out a little bit cheaper, and then have a version of it that comes out at a little bit higher price with like an SSD in there that has about 256 gigs of RAM. Not RAM, storage, because RAM is separate from storage. Let me not accidentally make that mix up. And obviously, I would want them to continue working with NVIDIA, which I'm pretty sure is very much confirmed at this point, for their chipset for the successor to the Switch so that they can still have their hybrid console and so that it would be good for backwards compatibility both in the physical and digital formats. So obviously that means that you want stuff like Nintendo Switch Online to transfer over and your account system to transfer over and everything to work on this platform the same way that it does on the Switch, but faster, more efficient. Anyone could ask for that. Another thing that I would personally prefer and would hope that they go back to doing is having multiple variations of the console as far as the physical design. So, like with the N64, had like 15 different colors, and the GameCube had like five or six. I mean, it doesn't have to be an extreme number. It really, truly does not have to be an extreme number. And they kind of went that route with the Switch with the Joy-Cons, being able to switch them out and having a multitude of different color variants of Joy-Cons and being able to swap them between each other and stuff like that. So you could have like a red Joy-Con working with a black Joy-Con or something like that. Have those options be available, allow you to be able to purchase and change out faceplates or for both the physical unit and if they're doing something with the dock, one with the dock as well. Speaking of the dock, and just because it's fresh on my mind since it was talked about in the Winging It podcast last night, and I have kind of been pushing this idea since like 2019. If Nintendo can figure out a way to make the dock boost the capability of the physical tablet. Like, we'll just call this the Switch 2 for simplicity's sake. But if Nintendo can find a way to utilize the dock to boost the performance of the Switch 2, say the Switch 2 maximum by itself pushes 1080p on the screen. On average, most games are running 720p. Okay? Then when it's docked, it boosts it to 2K. Now, based on things that we've heard already, because people don't want to admit this, the Nintendo Switch's hardware at the moment, the current Switch, is capable of running games in 4K. Doesn't mean it's going to be the most efficient thing to do it, but it is capable. So I would imagine that their next hardware iteration would also be capable of running things at 4K. But as we have seen, and it should be duly noted, running games in 4K is not always optimal. Even when you have the best hardware on the market, it's not always optimal because of how much strain it puts on a system, especially when you introduce stuff like ray tracing. So I would want them to limit it to 2K. Don't go beyond it. I mean, you already got a console on the market that's limited to 2K anyway, and that's the Xbox Series S. If that's limited to running games at 2K and displaying at 2K, then it should be no problem for Nintendo's next platform to have the same thing. That said, I would also hope that Nintendo works closely with Nvidia and has DLSS on the Nintendo Switch successor to Switch 2, because that would help with being able to have a decent looking display of a game as well as running the game very well. Because we all know lower frame rates are usually more conducive to I meant to say higher frame rates are usually more conducive to lower resolutions. Again, that's what makes logical sense to me, and I would stick with that. No point in trying to fully rock the boat when you've already got stuff in place that works well enough for it. And being that I have utilized DLSS on my PC and have seen the difference, it has seen the difference directly. It works very well. It does require that you have a constant internet connection, but it will clean up the image very well. And I think that that's something that they could implement, especially for if you're running your Switch 2 docked and plugged into your TV. I think that that would be very nice and helpful. So it could still run the games at, say, like the 720p resolution, and then when it's plugged into the dock, it automatically upscales through DLSS to 2K if you have your connection to the internet. Now, without it, maybe some games run a little bit slower. They don't run as fast. That's fine. What you could allow is for games to have adjustable settings like they're doing now on console anyway. So say somebody wants to play their game and they want to play it on full screen on the TV, but their Switch isn't connected to the internet or their internet's down. Then they can switch it to performance mode, which would be 1080p or whatever the highest frame rate they can get for it while it's docked. And then resolution mode would, lower the frame rate some, but the game would still have the clarity and such of it being 2K. Again, these are adjustments that are being made right now for Xbox and PlayStation, so I don't see a Switch successor giving these options being an issue. Maybe it could be something that's built into the programming of the system to allow it to make the adjustments, and I think that's kind of what DLSS does anyway. Again, you talk to Shadowfile. It's just my assumption that's what DLSS does. But I got sidetracked away from the argument of having the dock boost the performance of the Switch 2. Now, one way I think that it would be possible is if the dock itself is a power source, which means it would need a fan in it to cool everything down. So say the Switch 2 runs at maximum 15, 20 watts while it's in your hand. When it's docked, it could boost that to like 60 watts, where it could really smooth things out. And I think that would be the thing that would make the argument plausible, where you don't necessarily have to have a lot of new hardware in the dock, though I do think having some in there would also help mitigate some of the pressure and workload from the system. But I think that that's the efficient way of making it work. So the system itself can't get overheated because when it's in the dock's fan kicks on and it starts cooling it down. And the mini fan that's already in the Switch is also, or the Switch 2 at this point, is also going to be helping dissipate some of the heat. So if the dock has its own ventilation and fan in there, and when it's docked, it cranks up the wattage that the system can utilize without frying it, that makes it plausible to do what I'm talking about. And I think that that's the workaround when it comes down to it. Now, I'm going to tag Shadow Fox when I release this so he can listen to it and tell me if that's what he thinks would be a good workaround for that. So you can still have the majority of the hardware be in the tablet console, but not have to have it be incapable of working on higher settings for games in general. Because honestly, with as efficient as Nintendo is with their products, a Nintendo Switch running at like 60 watts is probably going to do some things that people didn't think it could do. That's where I think what they don't understand. That's where I think what people don't understand comes into play. When you talk about actual power being utilized by the console is a factor. And there are a lot of people that are just PC gamers that don't understand this. Like, I understood this before I even really got into PC gaming. That the physical wattage of the system does come into play. That's why you will find a lot of games on the Switch having performance issues, especially undocked, because the Switch is running on lower wattage to conserve battery power and energy. And there is one thing that Terminator Juice did say that I think would be a good thing to apply, and I think this also applies with the adjusting of the settings. Allow people to run their undocked Switch 2 at a higher wattage. Now, I still would add a cap to that, like have it be no more than 30 watts, because it's going to run very hot otherwise. But if undocked, it gets maximum 30 watts. I think that can help with a lot of issues, especially if it's going to be running games at lower resolutions anyway while it's undocked. That just makes more sense to me. And hopefully they will start out with OLED screens instead of how they did with the OG Switch. Again, this is just a lot of stuff I'm running through, and I'm trying to get through a bunch of different thoughts all at once. Also, when this platform launches, and again, having backwards compatibility, because it's backwards compatible with OG Switch games and titles and such, digital, physical, and we're migrating accounts and all that, any OG Switch game gets a boost for this version of the platform, or this platform, because it's going to be treated a lot like what the new 3DS was to the 3DS. It gave it a boost in performance for certain games. And again, that will smooth out a lot of issues for a lot of people. They'll be like, okay, I can trade in my old Switch, get this, and then I can play my games moving faster with better performance, hopefully not throwing off timing, unless like if a game has a specific need to be a certain way, then have the game have the console run the game that way, or have it set so that the game can be run in a higher performance mode, or have it run in original mode. Like, okay, OG Switch games, maybe running it at higher performance will throw off timing in the system, like playing Breath of the Wild does. If you play it on PC and you run that game at 60 frames per second, it throws off how some of the timing and events work in the game. Now, if it's running at 30, there's no issue with it for the majority of things. At least that's what I've heard and what I've seen through different videos. So maybe having a mode that allows your new Switch to play the game like it would be played on the original Switch. I did not mean to say new Switch. Switch 2 like it did on the original Switch. Because Nintendo would run with that naming. They would run with that naming. I'd hope they'd never do it again, but they would run with that naming. Having that be available would be nice. Now, there are other games that it wouldn't really be a bad thing for, like certain FPS games, certain action games, fighting games, that would not be a major issue for, to have a performance boost. Now, if the games are already running at 60, then it's not going to make much of a difference for them. Some of them just look a lot better and look a little bit cleaner. But either way, I think that helps. That'll help, having a multitude of settings for the games to be run at, which would likely mean that they would probably have to have two chipsets in the console, one running the hardware just as the Switch, and then the other running the Switch 2. So they would likely still have to include the original chipset for the Switch, at least in some way. I wonder, though, if they did that, if running both of them together when for the Switch 2 would give it a significant boost versus running the one for just the original Switch mode. Again, I'm not sure. Maybe they might end up doing what Nintendo did with the Wii U and having it just run a virtual Switch, and then the Switch 2 is the main OS and stuff, which they might do that as well. I would hope not, because that might overcomplicate things. And they would just have to run it down in that mode for just gameplay. Again, I'm not the tech guy on here, so I don't know per se how all of that would work. It's just things that are floating off the top of my head. Now, the next thing, and it's because they can't admit it openly, fix those Joy-Cons. Every analog stick drifts. There's no way around that. It's going to happen at some point unless you are very meticulous with your hardware. Drift is going to happen at some point. Just because of how people handle their stuff in general. It's really, really highly unavoidable for most people. So with their successor to the Switch, with everything being backwards compatible, you're still going to have Joy-Cons. They can be better Joy-Cons, but they're still going to be Joy-Cons. And the Pro Controller. And you can still have all the old stuff work with the new system. But there's just going to have to be a better quality control on the newer format. There's no two ways about that. And when they start bringing in the newer Switch 2, when they bring that in, they got to start phasing out the old Switch Joy-Cons. It's just going to be required. Also, and I meant to say this when I was talking about backwards compatibility with the games, but when they release the Switch 2, whatever its name is going to be, every game should be coming in okay, Switch games that are not going to run on, well, that are going to run across the board for all of them, because Switch 2 is going to be backwards compatible, at least within the first year. All of them should be in Switch case, and it'll just have a sticker on it that says that this one gets a performance boost. This game gets a performance boost in the Switch too, so that they don't have to change a whole lot of them, a whole lot of the cases. Or and they said this while they were doing the podcast. Have a sticker in it, or if it's a newer game, have it printed on the label somewhere that this gets a boost working with the Switch 2, but it still plays on the old Switch. Which I think was, I mean, there weren't very many games that played on the 3DS, the new 3DS, that didn't play on the original 3DS. And I think that Hyrule Warriors Legends had a sticker on it or something like that. They had something on it that said that it plays better on the 3DS, which that might be what they do. To say this game plays on the Switch, but plays better on the Switch too. I think that would work out for them to say it. Just put it that way. And when they finally do phase out the Switch, and everything moves over to Switch 2, at least the first run of that section of time for this platform, these games don't work on the Switch. Or this game does not work on the Switch, or just have a different physical format, slightly different, like they did from the DS to the 3DS, where the cartridge had something on there to disallow it to be fit into the old DS, even though it wasn't actually anything in there. It was just a piece of plastic, because you could, if you shave that plastic off, you can slot it into a DS, but it still wouldn't work on it. They could do something very similar to that, so that people understand, hey, this is solely for the new platform, and that would be good for everybody. And the games that work across both would be more in line with the older style of cartridge for the Switch. I don't think that causes a fight. I think it keeps things neat and makes it plausible for people to pick up a version of the game, or pick up a game that just solely works for the Switch 2 if that's the only platform they have, though I doubt many would. And maybe even off the beginning, and somebody's going to hate me for saying this, but charge a little bit more for the version of the game that works on both. Is logically what makes the most sense. Because if you want to keep your old Switch, or maybe you got the old Switch and you eventually want to go ahead and get the Switch 2, then that would be your best option. What else was I going to say? Because I ran through a bunch of stuff just now. Another thing to think about is, well, I can't call it virtual console, but old legacy content. Now, maybe that's going to be going on a while for the current Switch, but work some deals in place with Konami and a couple other companies. Let's say work something in place with Konami and with SNK. Well, SNK kind of already did that themselves, but work with Konami and who else had? I guess the people that did Wonder Swan, which I think was Namco Bandai. Work with them to get that old legacy content available, because it's currently not available on Switch, and I don't think it's legitimately been anywhere else. And a lot of people didn't get to really play those games. So it'd be a good idea to work with them to get some of that stuff in there. And for the love of everything, get GameCube and just give it to people, because everybody's been asking for it since the Wii U, and we know it was doable with the Wii U. So make it happen. Just try to get something from, at least get something from every one of your old legacy platforms, because there were a variety of things that people didn't get to play or experience. Because I'm not going to lie to you, OG Game Boy Mario was different from NES Mario for the most part. Those games had different things in them that made it worth playing them. And the same goes for like stuff like Mega Man back in the day. Those games had things in them that made them worth playing. So if you can get to work with Sega to get like old Master System stuff, if they ever are able to like find a way to properly emulate Sega Saturn, work with them on that. Get Dreamcast if you can. Just work with these companies to get stuff. Hell, I don't remember who has the rights to 3DO, but there are some games on 3DO that didn't go anywhere else. Might be worth trying to get those and having them be available for people. Again, expand options for legacy content and the nature of it. Instead of just having people remake the games, set yourselves up to have a lot of room for emulation. And those file sizes are tiny, so it's not going to affect much. And if they're keeping in line with everything, that means they're still going to have a micro SD card slot, which would allow you to go ahead and put a micro SDXC card in there that could be potentially up to 2 terabytes in order to store stuff. Again, these are all options that would be available that would be pretty good. Hey, and even make it so that it's possible to change out the SSD that's in the system if you bought that version of the system in the first place. Again, all this is stuff that people should be thinking about. This is stuff that I think Nintendo would do well to think about. And along with their legacy content, if they could get like the Nintendo versus arcade stuff, or any of their arcade stuff for that fact of the matter, and bring it to the Switch too, that would be awesome. Because I know there were a lot of people that would love to play F-Zero AX that have never played it before, including myself. And there would be a lot of people who would love to play the different arcade versions of Mario Kart. Bring all that stuff together. Bring it in there. Make it available. And Nintendo, please don't get rid of Mii's. Keep them. Maybe have 2 different versions of them now because Nintendo Switch Sports has a different avatar that's not really the Mii's, but they're similar enough. They look like, and I've said this before, but they look like the Slenderman version of Mii's. Like, if you've seen them on screen, if you could put them next to each other, the proportions of Mii's look almost normal, where the Switch mascot avatar character proportions look a little elongated. It's not drastically elongated, but it's just enough to be off. So this was like, but hopefully have that be available and maybe continue with the Switch line of games. Like you got Switch Sports, you can have Switch Play, you can have Switch Fit, which I had suggested years ago. Like bring that stuff, Switch Music. Again, it's the stuff's there, Nintendo. The money's on the wall, on the table for you guys. You just gotta do it. But there's that. Onboard recording for video games, like recording the game while you're playing it on the console. It's not necessarily a feature that needs to be there, but it would be nice for it to be there, be available. Which means that this OS is going to be heavy. so, I mean, with Nintendo's compression, it's likely going to be like, about 2 to 3 gigs of space if they do all this. But again, these are things that people wouldn't complain. If you put it in there, people don't complain about it. Sadly, not everybody's going to use it. But for quick stuff like uploading like a quick moment to YouTube, to Twitch, or any other video streaming platform, people aren't going to complain too much about having the option be there. What else was it? Because they already do screenshots and stuff like that, and they do short recordings currently with the Switch. What else was I thinking? There was another thing that tied into that. Because I know people will complain. Have voice chat built directly into the hardware. Not hardware, but built directly into the OS on the console. Don't get rid of Nintendo Switch Online's version of it. Keep that because I think that that's still a good option to have. But have direct on the console voice chat. And hey, when people are in their group chats and they're talking and they're playing their games and somebody's on the console, you'll know the difference because their voices will be muddled as hell when you're playing online with them versus someone who's just using their phone and utilizing the app. Again, just put it in there. Have it available so people can see the difference and then they'll stop complaining about it. Even if they say, well, it's too late now, Nintendo, just have it there. What else was I thinking about? And I've said this multiple times, but they need, they don't need, but have a game development studio or game development engine that is made specifically to be utilized on the console that people can purchase. And yeah, the garage builder is nice, but it's not something that you can make and sell games through. And the idea behind this is to get more people interested in game development in a way that would be available to people to be able to sell their games. Um, it doesn't have to be too different from the Garage Builder. Actually, it could just be an updated version of Garage Builder, like Garage Builder 2. There's a game. People know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. People made plenty of games with it, but for a short while, and they were posting little videos on Twitter and stuff, which has died down drastically because people got into doing it and they're not making money off of anything that they're doing. So it's kind of like, I don't want to do this no more. But they could, in theory, have a general game engine for the system that can be purchased and allow people to be able to sell games and have the pricing be based upon how big the game is. Now, how those tiers would be set up, I would not know. Like have a $1 tier, a $2 tier, or $3 tier, up to five, where people can sell their games and in the Garage Builder or even on the eShop. Again, it would be nice to have people. It'd be nice for people to be able to have that, so that people that are budding game developers or new to game development could get into it, and and it would be cool because then this harkens back to what was just recently brought out, and I don't remember the guy's name, but I'll find the video and post it because this guy does deep dives into old console hardware and stuff that pushes the limits of it. And he just did a video on the Famicom disk system working with cartridges and being able to write games to cartridge utilizing it. And that, which blew my mind, is that Nintendo basically had a game development engine in there. Like where you could do coding and stuff because it was set for basic. It was meant for you to be able to learn coding in basic and such. Nintendo could do the exact same thing with their game builder, which would allow you to learn like a few different basic, and I don't mean basic the programming language, but a few different basic programming languages like Python and stuff like that, because it's utilized in a lot of different games, and even some game developers don't even know that the engines that they're using are using it. But you could have them learn the input output stuff and then have them learn how to do the coding, and even let people go further into the coding to edit the coding itself to create different effects in their games. That would be cool to do. And again, then you allow people to sell their stuff. It's like having the homebrew community built into your console and allowing them to make and sell stuff through the console. And every time they use the engine, they have, like, say, basically when they purchase the engine, it gives them it gives them a license, like gives them a development license to release games on the console, but within certain rules that the game development suite comes with. Now, if they want to make a game outside of that suite utilizing whatever else, then they are the ones to determine the pricing of their game and what they're going to do with it. But if they're using like the Game Builder Garage, that's the name, the Game Builder Garage 2.0, and they're utilizing that to sell and release games, then it's based upon the size of the game, which you guys can determine based on whatever metrics you find to be decent. At least this is what my thinking is for Nintendo. Yeah, sure, there's going to be, like, sure, when this releases, there will be a boatload, I do mean boatload, of crappy games released. There's no way to get around shovelware. Every platform has shovelware, and the more popular the platform, the more shovelware it has. No two ways about that. But if they go through and do this and do it the way I'm thinking, plus all those would be like dollar games. Trust and believe most of those would be dollar games. Because people wouldn't want to put in the effort to try to load a game up with a bunch of stuff and it'd be crappy on purpose to try to make it $5. So if you're going to do that, most of those are going to be $1 games, $1 tiered games, and people will be like, eh. Plus, if you have ratings and feedback built into the eShop and well, obviously it's going to be built into the eShop, but if it's built into the storefront, that would be in the that would be built into the game engine, it would actually help mitigate that. So people would be able to warn others, like, don't get this game, such and such reason, okay? But I think that will be something to lean into. And again, you do this, it honestly would take away wouldn't take away. I think it could lessen people's desire to go ahead and jailbreak the hardware. I honestly think that it would lessen people's desires to jailbreak the hardware. And here's another thing that I suggested that I know nobody's probably going to agree with me on, but that is to work out something with either Google or Amazon to have a mobile storefront on the Switch 2. Because some of those games are older console games, and sometimes people already have them on a mobile account. And if you can find some way to have like put Google Play on the store on the eShop and allow people to download it, and then it runs like a minor version of Android, one that is specific for the Nintendo Switch, that they'll update and everyone gets those updates on time. That could be a major game changer for a lot of indie studios, especially the ones that solely focus on mobile, because it can get them to a broader audience. But on top of that, it can bring stuff to your console that has not been there before, and hopefully would be able to get a chance to be there. Unless you work with a lot of those mobile developers, and then this is a moot point. All of that stuff said, I think I've run on long enough with me talking about even just the Game Builder Garage section thing there. If there's anything that anybody would really like to add to what I'm saying, please go ahead and do that. If you got any questions that you'd like me to answer, to cover over some things, put them down in the comments on YouTube, because I will do another discussion to follow this one up. It's just that I think I've thought about enough stuff, a lot of things. I just don't want to overdo it, and I'm already bleeding into 45 minutes here. So we're going to go ahead and stop. But thank you guys very much for listening to this long-winded discussion. Keep your eyes and ears up for more stuff from me. And until the next time, enjoy your games. Peace out, everybody.